All right. Hello. I am Shalev. I am the lead designer on Gerda and Flaming Winter and the Liva story DLC.
And I'm Damir. I'm one of the writers on Gerda, Flaming Winter, and the Liva DLC as well. So yeah, we're just gonna sit here and talk about the game a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, we're watching a very non-spoilery compilation of moments from the DLC. So if you want to have a pure experience, of course, play the DLC blind. It will blow your socks off. But if you're watching this, don't worry about it. These are, let's say, the most things we can share that are okay to see and get an impression.
Yeah.
We're not giving you all the twists and turns in this compilation of like 3 or 4 scenes from this expansion.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it generally light in terms of like the narrative content that you might want to sort of uncover as you play. This is going to be a little bit more focused on, I think, kind of some of the setup and a few sort of things that highlight things that are unique about the DLC compared to the main game.
Yeah, we'll see a few missions, but let's say these are the parts of the missions that maybe are self-contained.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Damir, what are we looking at now?
Yeah, so this is the intro sequence that the game opens with. We find Liva and her team sort of fleeing the outskirts of Copenhagen. They're in the forest, having recently sort of botched resistance operation in the city, and now they're on the run. And so we're kind of seeing some of the early scenes in which Liva is starting to express some kind of doubt about how things have gone, her own competence, and this is going to become kind of a recurring theme throughout the game, right? This is a game that's one of the principal themes is sort of leadership and how one negotiates their own sort of self-doubt during moments of leadership, right? How a person manages both a team and their own internal expectations, and a lot of that starts with kind of assessing where the character is at the outset, which is a place of doubt which she can't necessarily expose to the other characters, except to Vigo, who is sort of her confidant and her leader and the person that she's been learning from. So to her, she's a little more to him, she's a little more capable of kind of expressing some of these concerns. But for the rest of the team, they're going to kind of have to keep it bottled up, and that is a challenge that Liva's going to face throughout the game.
Yeah. Right now, he's basically the person holding her hand and kind of cheering her up. But the tables might turn later. We based the emotional core of this experience about all kinds of challenges that we took from leadership. We spoke to both military leaders and managers in preparing the baseline tensions for this DLC, and a lot of both story and gameplay is around these dilemmas. So just like, for example, you need to hide some things from the people that you care most about, because you're the caretaker.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we were kind of going for with this early scene is to establish the central dilemma, like of what's actually happening. They're on the run because of a botched operation, but also start to very quickly highlight these themes of leadership, right? This sort of passing of the baton that's happening between Vigo and Liva is something that carries over through a lot of the rest of the game, and hopefully is also reflected a little bit in the main game, right? In the main game, we have Liva managing her team and her relationship with the members of her team, who become characters that are also crucial to Gerda's story, so this was a way to sort of also kind of highlight Liva beyond sort of Liva is a very sort of solid, assertive force in Gerda, I would say. In the main game, she's someone you encounter who has a very clear directive and a very clear vision.
She knows what she's doing,
She is sort of crystalline. And here we wanted to sort of complicate that and to sort of show, that beneath that facade of sort of confidence, there are still sort of crises happening internally. In a lot of ways, Gerda is a game, the main game is a game where you interact with a lot of external factors. You interact in social spaces a lot. You interact with the denizens of the village quite a bit at banquets and markets and lots of places. And this game is in some ways a little bit more internal in terms of the dilemmas and the crises you face, right? It's more interpersonal maybe than some of the situational stuff we have in Gerda, which is both challenging and kind of exciting to write for.
Yeah. Here we see the group, basically. That will be the core of Liva's interaction throughout the game. She needs to kind of like chaperone them. They're not the only ones. Some characters are going to be added soon, but they are not completely split ideologically. But as you said, Damir, we're going to see how more nuanced approaches and nuanced attitudes come up to the surface about how to basically chase the same goal, the same ideology, right? And she's gonna be treading this ground when they express different attitudes that she could be having as well.
Yeah, and so very early on right now we're seeing kind of an example of that where they all know they're on the run. They all know they want to, get away from the pursuing soldiers or potentially lay low and hide. And ultimately, everyone's objective is kind of the same, but in this very sort of clear way, very early on in the game, we present sort of different approaches to the same broad objective, right? A lot of the team wants to stay put and hide and catch their breath, and some want to keep running. And in this case, this is early in the game before Liva has sort of attained her status as a leader, and so she's not necessarily able to convince the other members of the party of the choice that she might want to make, or you as the player might want to make, right? You are sort of slightly inhibited in your possibility space early in the game because you are playing a version of Liva that has not yet attained sort of the role of leader, which she is about to. Right?
Yeah. So you can see here, in terms of the mechanics, we still have the trust mechanic on the right side of the screen from the main game, but now we have different types of abilities that Liva as a leader can have, which is duty, fury, and care. As you said, she still haven't built them up, so it's disabled for the player, and all she can do is kind of like say a weak butt. But as the game progresses and she builds up her capabilities as a leader, the player can open up this possibility space of leading in different styles that are also reflected in the different characters that are pulling her into those different attitudes. We're looking into basically how take the type of social role-playing that we established with Gerda and using the same system give it a whole different flavor. And that is the flavor that we landed with Liva the leader, right? It's leadership style. While Gerda had these basically social abilities, right? Liva has an attitude.
Yes, yeah. And it's probably maybe worth mentioning, too, that we explored several different versions of that approach throughout the development of the DLC, right? We had stats that were a little bit more of sort of like economy-based stuff, the authority and the solidarity, and some stuff that we kind of trimmed and refined to like ultimately make the experience a little more, a little cleaner, a little bit, like to make it sort of more evident to the player what these sort of different leadership roles really were and how they functioned. So that was an interesting sort of balancing act, finding out exactly how to get give Liva those abilities and also make it sort of transparent in intent, I guess I would say. This is a cozy little moment where we start to tease out Kessa, one of the members of the team. He's kind of the team chef, and we're starting to sort of tease out a few details about him wanting to cook things, and that becomes sort of, because this is a game about interpersonal dilemmas, we want these sort of cozier character moments, and with Kessa, that his way of coping with stress is to just nurture people around him by cooking, which is not necessarily how he behaves during an operation. He might be a little more aggressive than some of the other characters when they're actually out in the field. But we hope everyone's kind of multifaceted in the game.
Toft is a bit more, I guess, competitive with Liva right off the bat. He has a little tease with her, which will be picked up on later in the game as well.
Yes. Yeah. You know, and one of the things we try to do as often as possible is really like give the player the chance to articulate their version of Liva. Liva is to some degree a preset character. She is a character that needs to reach a certain endpoint because she is the same character in the main game.
Yeah.
That we see when we play as Gerda.
Yeah.
But we still wanted to give players some latitude to express certain nuances within that same sort of broader character. And so you'll see a lot of choices that, generally we try to like reflect most of the choices you make into stats, into sort of tangible branching and like things that, are very much systemic. But we also just like have some choices that, hopefully help you express your version of Liva. I think is an important part of playing these kinds of games. At least for me, when I play this stuff, that's something I look towards.
Yeah, one of the things that we really emphasized also with the main game is we don't do blank slate characters, right? So there's role-playing games, especially heroic role-playing games, where the character is just like this, basically puppet that you fill in and you express all your kind of like desires and kind of like wishes to be very capable or not, or some kind of ways you can act that are different than real life. This is very much the kind of game that we're making with the DLC as well. Is the kind of game where you're inhabiting a specific character and it has a specific range. There is this range. The place of the player is to express how you pull it in different directions, but you are playing a specific role, and the role of Liva is she has a very bold character, a character that we think a lot of people can empathize with, if not her situation of being a resistant fighter, then the kind of dilemmas that she's struggling with.
Yeah.
But you are thinking about what's good for her, and we are always walking this line between giving the player always a range of choices and a range of abilities to express, and telling also the player you are inhabiting a specific person that has their specific attitudes and specific ways of dealing with the world.
Yeah, I mean, one sort of concrete way we kind of dealt with this too is like Liva as a character is a communist, right?
Yeah.
But we recognize that not every player might necessarily want to play the sort of most hardcore communist version of Liva, and you have a chance to like express her ideology to the degree that you want to, right? There are going to be dialogue choices throughout the game where you can sort of take a hard line, very ideological stance, and or you could choose something that's sort of more immediate and situational and like So hopefully, while Liva still remains the character that she is, you get to sort of, be the version of her that you want to be.
I just want to say, in the background, there's an animated deer standing around.
Oh yeah, that got added very late. I didn't even...
I fully appreciate it, because when we did the original kind of like location scouting for Gerda, the base game, I actually went down with our former art director to that area of Sunderjylland in South Denmark, and we did this 3-day basically road trip around the area, checking out different locations and trying to figure out what's not just the atmosphere but also specific places for the game. That's how we found Tinglev. We found Tinglev by going down there and touring different towns, and there was a specific moment that we both were in awe. This part of the world, we're mostly dealing with the culture of this part of the world, but there's also nature. And we were driving through a forest on our way from town A to town B, and all of a sudden, just on the side of the road, there was this deer standing just like that, looking majestic and staring at us. And we both just got out of the car and just stared at the deer until it left. So this scene, minus the very dramatic discussion, actually happened to us. And of course also the endless forest of that region. If you're from the north, then you might know them. Be it Germany or Lithuania or many parts of Denmark as well.
And actually, one sort of small, maybe little technical insight is in the main game of Gerda, we don't have a lot of vertical elevation, right? Generally, things occur at one plane. And in this DLC, we wanted to sort of start playing with the idea of sort of separating characters by elevation, because it gives you different vantage points, it gives you sort of different situational awareness, and in particular, we kind of use it. I think it's a pretty solid effect here in the early part of the game, which was just a fun, it's not necessarily the biggest technical hurdle we had to overcome during this, but it was we did have to figure out some things and sort of, there were some issues with the nav mesh that thankfully all got sorted, and I think it works pretty well.
I think it looks well, and everything for those of you who are listening and are not game developers, everything in game development is a hurdle if you haven't planned for it.
Yes, yeah. Because I do think at one point we're just like, maybe we should add a hill. It would be pretty nice if they were looking over and suddenly this was a thing we had to do. And Oh yeah, and quite a bit more sort of custom animation. Just noticing the train tracks, that reminded me that there might be. You see train tracks. Maybe there's going to be a train running on those train tracks.
Maybe, we don't know, because we might cut the scene at this point to prevent some spoilers. So we could find out when we buy the DLC and play it. But we are going to move very soon to the next scene, because some things are happening, and we want to keep some secrets for the full play experience. So we need to go back, and we move to the next scene.
Arrived in Tinglev.
So, Damir, can you talk a bit about the narration and how we dealt with that?
Yeah, I mean, so in the main game we had narration that was sort of designed around Gerda's journal, right? Gerda had a journal, and it would kind of happen at the end of a level.
Yeah.
And here we wanted Liva to sort of express herself a little more directly than she does always with her other characters or with the other people in her team. And this was kind of our way of giving her a little bit of an internal monologue and a little bit of dramatic setup for each of the sequences. And so we ultimately started with these sort of small narration sections that happened before most levels, and then generally occur up in the skyline, as you just saw, and come down. And they're sort of designed to prime the player for both the drama that's about to happen and also to help give them a sense of Liva's internal state of mind as we enter into these. And they tended to be, whereas Gerda was a little bit more flowery, a little bit more, verbose, and also just sort of sometimes occasionally poetic with her phrasing. Liva, having a journalistic background as a character, is a little bit more staccato, a little bit more factual, a little bit more kind of matter of fact with the way that she presents this narration. And so we hoped that was kind of reflected there. It's also reflected a little bit in some of the journal mission entries you see. We kind of use shorthand, journalistic shorthand, as opposed to, again, Gerda's kind of more flowery prose. So yeah, that was kind of...
So this scene is still from the beginning of the game.
Yes.
A little later, I think a scene and a half or two, something after the one we saw before, but still from the beginning, and that is where Liva and her team, they're already in Tinglev. If you play the main game, you might recognize this place. It is the hideout that they used in the beginning of the original game as well. And she is basically working with them towards taking on missions and towards all of the things that they will do as active resistance cell in Tinglev. And it is still a fairly social scene.
Yes.
Similar to the previous scene, it is about talking to different people and managing both their own needs and sometimes tensions between them. So Liva, as the leader, needs not only to make sure that everybody is prepared for battle, but also making sure that basically their emotional needs are met, because they all have doubts. This is a very, very tense situation, and also very confusing situations. These are not soldiers who've been trained by professionals for years and years and years. Peter and Anas, who that both just joined the cell as the locals, need to learn how to shoot a gun.
Yep.
And her other teammates, even though they're more experienced, maybe they've been, resistance members for a few years, are still not professional soldiers. So managing both their abilities, but also just how they cope with the death and tension and persecution that their life involves, is a big part of Liva's work as a leader. And we took inspiration both from talking to commanders and people who experienced being leaders in military situations, but we also took inspirations for, it's a metaphor for sometimes how managing morale in any kind of team, a sports team, a work team, is, right? You need to help people cope with stress of working together.
Yeah, and with that also comes, encouraging various people's different competencies, right? We have the more experienced Copenhagen team that's come down with Liva. We've got the new guys here, and all of them, Anders and Peter might not be as experienced, but they know the local area, and that's a huge asset, with the kind of stuff that they're doing. But even between Anders and Peter, there are different competencies, right? In some ways, Peter, much like he is in the main game, is a little bit of a live wire, but he's also the most social character in the team, right? So he's the one with the most connections, with the most aptitude in terms of working with the locals, and so sometimes that helps the team quite a bit. Sometimes it might get the team into a little bit of trouble, and as Liva, you have to kind of negotiate how you encourage or discourage your team members, because that's going to have a psychic effect on them, right? So yeah, that was again though, leadershiping, the really big kind of umbrella theme of the game, I think is.
So you see here, we wrote limited time, and another interesting mechanic that we introduced in this game, which had some expressions in the base game, but now is much more formalized, is you're under pressure, people are moving, things are moving, and you don't even have enough time to care for all of your team members. And sometimes, Gerda and the Liva DLC is all about hard choices and all about not being able to satisfy everybody. Here it's expressed in the fact that in many, many points in the game, the player has to choose basically who they're favoring, right? Which is a very, very tough choice, and not a cool choice to do when you're a leader, a manager, any kind of caretaker. Right, you want to say I have no favorites, but the fact of the matter is when you're giving attention to some person, you're not giving attention to somebody else. And as you know, the brand of Gerda, Flaming Winter, and the Liva DLC is uncomfortable, tough choices. This is one of them. So we systematize it by making sure that whenever the player is able to address the needs of all of their team members, there's just isn't enough time or space to do that, and you have to think, we wanted to make even the act of exploring and clicking on points of interest being something that is sometimes, a decision to make. So that's how we make it. There's never enough time to talk to everybody, and you will have knock-on effects for that. For example, you can only you raise your trust with them, which you really need to get them to do what you want later in the game, and of course you can invest also in raising your duty, fury, care, right? A lot of the game also is about managing the tensions between trust and the leadership style points.
Yeah, and actually somewhat related to that, we at one point sort of mapped the alignments, so to speak, of the individual members of the team in terms of how much duty, fury, and care did they sort of tend to align with, right? So Anders is a very high care character. He's also a pretty high duty character, not as high as care, and his fury is generally relatively low, whereas some of the other characters have sort of different, we sort of did these what are they called? Like radio diagrams.
Like a matrix.
Yeah. So we had like 4 or 5 of them like up there to see like where everybody was aligning, and we generally tried to balance them so that in situations, because you'll go on missions with different characters throughout the game, we tried to make sure that there was always some conflict between those stats, so that if you did tend to align with one stat and one character, that might put you in a good position to work with Anders, but not necessarily with Benta or with Kessa. To help, again, do that thing of putting you in uncomfortable situations where you have to make uncomfortable choices. Because that is our bread and butter, basically. We don't want to make you uncomfortable, but not in a, just in a, oh man, I don't want to choose this sort of way.
Yes, our bread and butter.
Yeah.
Or our Marmite.
Our Marmite, or Vegemite, depending on.
Yeah.
And there's small detail that I think Ida added.
Ida Christensen.
Ida Brony Christensen, co-writer on the game. Our fantastic Danish expert, I would say, as well, because as you can probably tell, neither of us are Danish. But Peter's bike has racing stripes on it because he painted racing stripes on it, which I think is just like a cute detail of like he wishes his bike was a race car. He just, like, everything about him, like there's this sort of like adolescent like desire for speed and adventure, and like that's I think that's just like a nice little way to articulate that. Because that's Peter as a character. He's the dude who's gonna paint racing stripes on his bike as though it'll make it go faster.
Yes, I wonder if canonically he does it for his clients too. Peter works as a mechanic together with Anas. That's the shared business, the business partners. I wonder if like whenever a client comes into to the shop, Peter is like, "Would you like maybe for me to add stripes
and vents on the side?"
And the client is like, "Oh no, I don't think that's necessary." And Peter is like, "I'll do it free."
just toss it.
I think it'll just look really nice,
I feel like he's offered it at least once, at least.
Yeah.
So here we're looking at this is a situation where Liva has chosen to speak with Peter. So we delve a little deeper into his character. We sort of start having a personal conversation with him. You can see even the camera gets just physically more proximate to sort of emphasize that this is a character that Liva's starting to get to know better now. They're becoming a little more intimate, and you can see the racing stripes.
Yep. And we don't want to make players play in any kind of way. But we really focus on replayability, which means, of course, there's a lot of choices, and a lot of the choices are very, very fatal in this game, and you might want to replay, just like many of you replayed the base game to get a different result and see what else can happen. This is also the case here, but because it's such an interpersonal game, we also made sure that you can replay to basically get closer to different characters and dig deeper into their backstories. So you'll get to know the baseline of every character in the DLC on your first playthrough. But some choices will lead you closer to some of your subordinates and further for some of them. And if you explore the possibility tree, and we're not going to tell you exactly how, in the game, you could replay the game and basically learn more and get even closer and get really, really deep with some of some other characters on your second or third playthrough of the DLC. I believe that technically you could, if you math it right, you could cover all of the characters in 2 DLC playthroughs.
Thinking at least 2. You would need at least 2.
Yeah.
Maybe I think you might need 3 actually because of. Well, yeah, but you would need more than 1 for sure.
There's a very clever system behind the scenes that I don't remember how the math works right now, but we definitely did it.
Yes. There were spreadsheets and charts, and it's definitely there.
Yes, it's the colors, yeah.
And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's any, because we dressed this hut a little differently than it's dressed in the main game. But
I don't remember the box with explosives.
Yes, I think that was one thing we added.
a lot of because we're basically revisiting a lot of places in the game, in the main game. The DLC is a mix of new locations and old locations. We really tried to kind of reintroduce locations that the players already know, and in some scenes it would be through different angles. Right, just literally showing the 3D space from an angle that the players have never seen before, and in other places it's about redressing some things and giving a different atmosphere. Here in the the hideout sadly was never designed to be seen from any angle, except that kind of like linear angle that you see in all of those scenes. So we did some other things with it.
Like our art department spent a lot of time dressing the forest around, right? Because as Shalev just mentioned, initially you come in, it's very unidirectional. Gerda walks in the main game and has a conversation inside this hut, and it's generally filmed from one or presented from one angle. And now because you sort of have this freedom, we had to dress a lot more of the forest, which was something that took a little bit of time, because every once in a while we'd add a new conversation, which created a new angle, and suddenly there's a little bit more forest.
Yes. Just make the entire thing from the beginning.
Yes. Also, a random detail, but the outhouse. And I don't remember what the conclusion of this was. I should have looked this up before bringing it up. But the fact that it has a crescent moon, there was something about outhouses with crescent moons were different than ones with stars or suns. One was for women and one was for men. There was something to that effect, and we did a bunch of research one day about that, and I don't remember where it ended.
Yes.
Maybe I should have not just brought this up, but I can't stop looking at the outhouse.
Now everybody who's watching this video is gonna Google it, find that you made a mistake, post it on the forum, and demand a refund.
Engagement. This is why I'm not the social media guy.
Shoot, that's me, right?
I think it's
Oh,
you get to do
all right. Now we are seeing another returning beloved character from the main game. It's Torben. Torbs. Yeah, he's come bearing a message and immediately gets a gun pulled out on him, which is something that happens sometimes. Yeah.
Especially when you're, a team of sort of on-edge paranoid resistance fighters. But yeah, I think, I don't know how much longer until we get to that spot, but we try to also, when you get to sort of some of these choices in the game that are choices about who you're going to go with on a mission, who you might align with, we tried to actually reflect that in the spatial configuration of the characters as well. So you notice they're sort of arranged in proscenium with Liva in the middle and her team on either side. And I think there will be a slight rearrangement of their positions in a second. But ultimately, you're either going to choose one or the other. And it's, just like a simple thing to articulate, choices are also physically separate, and you feel it a little bit more by just separating the characters like that.
I don't know if have you ever seen the prototype, the original prototype for Gerda?
I've seen a couple videos, but
So we made the original prototype included this scene, but in a much uglier version, right? But we definitely had an outhouse as well.
Was it a crescent moon?
Might be. I need to look into it. I think I shared on our Twitter a GIF from the original prototype. Definitely had an outhouse. I don't know if you used it. The characters that we had were Liva, Torben, and Heinrich. Right?
Oh, that's right.
Back then, Liva was already the leader from the very beginning. Torben was originally cast as a resistance member himself. And he was about to beat up or even kill Heinrich, which is a thing that, without spoiling to anybody who played the main game, not this event, but the themes of the characters, went to different places, but the themes actually definitely rolled into other events in the main game. But the thing about the proscenium is what I wanted to say, which is one of the ways I sold the presentation of the game to Hans, our director, when I was prototyping it, is I didn't want a fully 360 3D environment. I wanted something that felt more like theater. So it's 3D, but it's seen a lot from a mostly one direction perspective that is a bit frontal, right? And we used it as kind of like a way to measure the vibe of a scene in a lot of the kind of levels that we designed, but we put it on the back burner for most of the production because it wasn't a leading aesthetic. But because it was a very talky game, where a lot of characters talk a lot, I felt that the theater metaphor of thinking about how to create scenes is probably something to be arranged. And when I asked you guys to do this proscenum, whenever there's a discussion, it kind of brought me back to this metaphor of a theater play that's playing out in front of you, and just like a choir in a tragedy or something like that, or just like an audience sitting in front of a play, there is some 3D-ness to it, but you're generally watching the characters stand and speak. It also really helped with camera.
Oh, I mean, it's so much easier. Not having dialogue, overlapping characters. But yeah, one thing is I think we're about to see a choice where Liva has to choose who to go with, and they initially were dialogue choices. You would choose option 1 or option 2, and they were presented in the lower third, the way most dialogue options are. And then we realized how much more effective it felt to actually just put it out in the world. So they became points of interest that you click on above your characters, above your teams. Which I think we'll see that in a second. But as they sort of, I think they're sort of recapping what the missions will be.
We got rid of the map screen for this DLC.
Yes.
We wanted to be, the DLC happens across a longer period of time.
Yes.
And it wouldn't make sense to use the map screen as in the base game, because in the base game everything is happening in succession, and Gerda is choosing where to go. Here it's a much more tighter possibility space, but across a longer time, so we got rid of the map screen. So for having the feeling that you're choosing a scene, you're choosing where to go next, we needed it to have a bit more gravity than just a dialogue choice. So that's why it's basically mapped onto the scene itself.
And here, the sort of characters are kind of talking about the mission parameters, but in a way that highlights, again, their particular competencies. Anders and Peter, being the locals, are guiding when and where the team might be able to do things, and Kessa and Benta are sort of suggesting ways in which they might actually go about the mission, because they're a little more experienced in the missions. But here we've now reached the choice moment, right? You get a sort of brief overview of the 2 mission options. You should be able to click out of this and then go to the other one. And I don't know if we did in this video. No, we didn't.
But you can choose one or the other, and very clearly it says that's where you'll go to in the next scene.
And then, should start a new mission soon. Do you know which one we're jumping into after this?
I think to this mission. I think we're gonna do
Infiltrating the Gestapo HQ.
Yeah. If I remember correctly. Now hop to it.
Those trees, they weren't there for a lot of this. They got added right at the end.
Most of the town was attending
one of the things that are striking about that region of the world is the big skies and the massive landscapes sometimes. And because we have a top-down game, we sometimes lose it. And that's why Daniel, art director, asked me that we begin every scene in the game with this basically camera coming down from the big sky onto the landscape, either it's the town or different parts of South Jutland, so we can get this big sky, flat landscape feeling of that region. It's a very striking feeling when you go there. You can also see, if I talked about seeing places from a different angle, I don't know if anybody who played the game, the original game, and is now seeing the DLC, has realized up until this camera turn that we were looking at the Gestapo headquarters and the street, because we never showed that particular part of the town from that angle, and that was part of us trying to create this feeling of discovering the same locations but from a different angle. A lot of times this group will be sneaking around in alleys, because that's a lot of what they do is sneak around in the underground, so they are hiding in the alley behind where Gerda would approach this scene in the main game.
Yeah, and that is that sort of notion of them sort of being a little bit more in the shadows than Gerda did introduce a few kind of challenges in terms of setting up scenes. So here they're in an alley, right, but there is a building on either side of them, and to get the camera to work, you have to, at the exact right moment, turn one of the buildings off so it's not clipping with the camera. And so there are all these like little, so yeah, they're right now they're
the camera is inside the building.
Yeah, it's inside the building. So there's a lot of this stuff, but it was meant to like reflect that this is not a team that operates out in the open the way Gerda could. These are people who have to kind of be tucked in, and yeah, there were a few fun little technical tidbits there and also just like adding nav mesh to places that didn't have nav mesh, places where characters can walk where they couldn't walk before.
Yes,
we needed to make sure that was actually possible. So
gamers, I know you don't care about this, but nav mesh issues are
they're the worst.
Yes. Yes, you've heard about doors. Everybody on the internet heard about how doors are annoying game devs, but those are just a small part of the big story that is nav meshes. All right. So in this mission, without spoiling too much, they are here to basically try and infiltrate the Gestapo headquarters somehow in order to retrieve some papers. But as they are approaching the station, they see basically one of the factory workers, a union leader, being hauled to arrest for being a union leader.
Yeah.
And it complicates the mission, because now there are two goals. Well, there are two goals, there are tensions.
Yes, and again, going back to what we talked about earlier about sort of the character grids and where they align with certain leadership stats, right? Anders is a care-driven character, and Benta is a little bit higher on the duty scale than Anders. She's not as high on the duty scale as maybe somebody like Kessa would be, but she is, in this case, is kind of the one who's more aligned with the mission, and Anders might be more aligned with the mission as intended originally, right? Go find these papers. And Anders is more aligned with, hey, there's a human being that we need to save that I know from town, right? This is a guy I know. We got to help him out, right? So again, we're trying to also reflect all of these tensions, these situational tensions, very much in your team. So they are sort of, it allows for more personal expression of the dilemma, but also kind of in a very like sort of technical writing side. Like, it just gives you an opportunity for exposition through conflict, as opposed to having Liva or somebody just sort of exposit the information. Your characters, by being on different sides of the issue, argue about it and reveal information, to the player that they can then act on. So that made it much, much sort of cleaner to write for, much easier to sort of articulate things. Otherwise, you get clunky dialogue where it's just like, this is a dilemma, and let me, And here we see Charlotte, who some of you might remember from the main game. And this is, earlier in her career, slightly, as a Nazi collaborator.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
We've all been there. You're starting up. You're a young upstart in the Nazi collaboration business, right? So, of course, they're using fake names, but they're also using the trick that seems to work on Charlotte, which is appearing like a young, hapless maiden, while obviously they are actually being, tough resistance fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, this was another thing we kind of wanted to touch on because this is a time in Danish history where things were maybe a little more traditional. There were more defined gender roles than maybe there are now. And in Gerda, one of the kind of things we dealt with was she is a working professional in a time where a married woman didn't always need to be a working professional or wasn't always expected to be a working professional. And we wanted to sort of touch on those things, and here as well we kind of do it with the expectations people have of Liva and Benta as younger sort of women in wartime, and how they use that to their advantage, and also how that sometimes maybe can make sort of an uneasy situation feel kind of queasy. But yeah, I don't know. I'd rather let Ida talk about that more than I. So
we're
I'm just a dude.
We are two dudes, but but we definitely
we're sensitive to the topics, but maybe not the best people to always articulate.
But that's why we have also a female writer on the team to channel, and it's important to say more generally that I think we talked about it a little when we were doing it, kind of like the campaign for the original release of Gerda. But even though this is a historically accurate game with a lot of research that went into it, not just Hans, our game director and CEO, not just Ida, who did a lot of research, but also we had even a historian be with us, on site for a few months to create an historical database for this game. Even though it's a very historically realistic game, we were always on the lookout for how this game either channels experiences that we've had or challenges some presuppositions and some beliefs that we had. Just like the game that we're working on now, the next game is a science fiction game, but we're using it to talk about our present day. In the same way, we're using a historical game to talk about our present day, and not just tell you what happened, right? And I know that I'm bringing, for example, I was a soldier, as some of our other team members were, and they're bringing some of the experiences into this game and into the characters in this game who are soldiers. Both you and I come from places in the world that have territory conflicts and ethnic conflicts, and we're channeling that into the story of occupation in this game. So a lot of these things we mentioned, gender politics, but all kinds of different questions are basically, we're looking at this very pronounced historical time, this time where conflicts were very, very stark, as a tool to talk about a lot of things that are happening right now or relevant to other parts of the world.
I mean, when I first sort of came on board, one of the things we talked about that I was most interested in with the Gerda main game, because I was already in development when I came on as one of the writers, was this this sort of conflict region where people who live side by side before, during, and after conflicts have to sort of deal with different ideologies that sometimes manifest themselves in really violent, destructive ways, right? And so because my own personal background from the Balkans is that is a thing, very much there. And it was, we had at one point, I think you had us sort of write down what our sort of creative ambitions for the game were, and one of mine sort of alluded to kind of reflecting the reality of that kind of space, because it's not a thing where you can be sort of openly confrontational all the time, because that just doesn't become tenable if there's like persistent conflict, if you still have to live with this person side by side. So there's this sort of there's this sort of very kind of like uneasy truths at times, and then flashes of violence, and then and just a sort of underlying tension, which is something we wanted to explore.
So here we come to a moment where basically Liva has to make a big decision in the context of this mission. We can see the spatial composition reflects that. Bente is standing next to the door that leads to Stahl's office, and she's like, we need to find the papers. And Anas is standing next to the hallway that leads to the holding cells, and he's like, we need to free Gregersen. And they all know that the guards that just left the room are about to come back, and you can't do everything. Whatever you do, it's going to come at a cost. So Liva is now basically going on the duty path. We see that she got some extra duty, and she is sticking to the mission, even if it might hurt a human being who's being held up in the cell right now. And this is not the kind of thing where there's an obvious answers. Are you fighting the Nazis, or are you aiding the working class? It's some people may say, I know, but a lot of people will be like, there's a person in jail, right? But also we are fighting the Nazis, and without spoiling too much, these papers are also used to save lives, right? You are not just playing around. You need those papers. So these dilemmas are fatal, and these dilemmas are tough, and we hope that players both feel the pressure, but also maybe replay the DLC again. We really focus on strong replayability with both the main game and this DLC. And see what a different choice might create, and where it might lead the team. And she found the documents, but maybe not necessarily able to free Gregersen. So she found the documents, and Bente found some liquor.
Yes.
A bit of schnapps.
Yeah. Chaos agent moment from Bente.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, generally with these, with a lot of the missions in the game, a lot of it are kind of like designed for them was like you would generally be able to execute certain things if that was your intention, and if you put the resources into executing them. I don't want to say too much to sort of give things away, but even if you do, there's going to be some sort of complications along the way, right? It's never going to be you choose to do a thing and congratulations, here is what you were looking for, it's smooth sailing from here. And those particular dilemmas, those particular complications, they get exacerbated the further you are into the game, right? Some of the early ones are a little lighter than some of the later ones, considerably, I would say, thinking about some... Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but... Yeah, but now the lights have come on, so you got to get out of there.
Exactly. It means
time.
Yeah.
So Gregersen is... maybe Andrew saved him, maybe he didn't. Guess we're about to find out.
Yeah. A small thing that I think you added it actually into the game, you or Ida, is that in some of those missions you can actually make choices by omission, right? You can, so here's a pro tip to whoever is watching us in order to, I don't know, get good at the DLC. Remember to call Anas when you're about to leave, because if you just run away as one would, you might actually piss him off.
We wanted, if you want to be an attentive leader, you also kind of have to be an attentive player. You have to, pay attention to what's going on around Liva and not ignore things.
Yeah.
So keep your eyes peeled for
Click everything.
all the things. just an early 90s point and click adventure game now. You're just pixel hunting.
Imagine that we did like a hardcore mode where you don't see the UI, you just have to click on things.
It's immersive mode.
Immersive,
Yeah.
exactly, immersive mode.
So yeah, you see on the left there's a blue building that had conveniently been turned off when the camera was facing the other way. So
Are you a game designer?
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
sneaky little bits.
All right. So now they're kind of recapping, and Liva is both saying what she wants, but also being handed some critique. And now we've come to the last scene I think that we'll look at this playthrough. This is another mission, a bit more later in the game. Not at the very end, but towards the end of the game. So you're in deeper trouble. And Damir, you want to explain to us what's happening in this scene?
Yeah, so this is a stage in the game where the conflicts have gotten a little bit more dire, a little more desperate, and the team needs weapons. And so they've come to the market in Tinglev to meet with some contacts that Peter has. Because again, Peter is the social butterfly of the team, who knows all the sort of ins and outs of who can get what in rural Sunderland. And so yeah, you've come here to try and negotiate a deal for some weapons, but as with most things, it probably won't be that straightforward.
Yeah. You can see that in this playthrough, the player chose to put a lot of points into care, basically have way more care points than duty and fury. Even when in that choice about the radiator, they lean towards the caring attitude. And it's the kind of I don't want to say trick, but the kind of temptation that we also see in the base game in Gerda's story sometimes, where it's tempting to be caring and nice, but there can be some very because the situation is dire, because we're in crisis, because sometimes nice guys finish last. I don't want to push that agenda, of course, but I'm saying in some crisis situations, it doesn't work to be always a nice guy. There might be severe knock-on effects to not putting enough effort into your duty or even your fury, right? It just pushes the story in a specific direction, and I think we also saw it in the main game, where, without spoiling too much to people who didn't play the base game, Gerda could help several factions, and there sometimes are things that seem like the very obviously right thing to do, which basically is helping somebody who is in a weak position, helping the meek.
Yeah.
But these things, while immediately are very satisfying, you feel like a hero, or you feel like a good guy or a good girl, can have very undesired knock-on effects, not even for you personally, but also morally, right? You know, the ethical implications of being nice all the time in a situation where there's a lot of crisis and a lot of needs and a lot of dependency can be not exactly what you imagined.
No good trolley problem has an easy choice.
Yes, we basically, we made a very complicated web of trolley problems in this game.
Essentially, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So now in this scene, as we're saying, the guns that Peter has orchestrated for the team to get, turns out they're coming from the Nazis. So already the Wehrmacht is, a potentially corrupt Wehrmacht soldier is the one who's going to be able to provide the guns that the team needs. But that's already kind of a situation that complicates what, you know, are you essentially working with the Germans in order to combat other, again, without spoiling things, other forces that you might need to come up against as the resistance, you know, and what are the lines there that you kind of as the player get to determine. The way this scene plays out, I don't know if we'll get all the way to the end. I'm guessing probably not. You know, you can kind of choose how much Liva is willing to bend her convictions in order to get what the team needs. Because again, no clean choices, hopefully, no easy choices, no like obvious. And then, oh yeah, we got Nis here. I don't think he's shown up yet in the video, right? Nis, another character from the main game, who we kind of see as a black marketeer. Now we get to delve a little bit deeper into his sort of black market schemes. And that was another one of the sort of like set of opportunities we had in the DLC, is to take a lot of these side characters that you got to sort of interact with, sometimes tangentially, sometimes a little more concretely in the main game, and sort of dive into their backstories, dive into what it is they were actually up to before the events of the main game. Get to know them better as characters, which hopefully, you know, provides some dramatic irony in certain instances, depending on how things went in your playthrough of the main game, and depending on how things go in your playthrough of the DLC.
Yeah, and we really wanted to the story stands on its own 2 feet as a standalone story.
Yes.
But we really wanted it to also be satisfying and gratifying for people who played the main game and now get to either spend more time with some of the characters that they met, or see some of them in a new and sometimes ironic light.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is again another scene where we're entering a location that we visited potentially several times in the main game, right? In the market square, you can come here very early in the game, and then at a couple of other points. And we're seeing it again quite literally just from a different angle, and the market feels different. Your sort of you know, way of navigating the space feels different. We open up a few extra corridors. We dress things a little differently. And again, speaking of characters from the main game, we've got Gerda,
the one and only.
Yeah.
And it's very odd to see her in a kind of like a hapless situation. Well, because in the game, of course, she's very capable, and sometimes, you know, helping a lot of other people. And here she's just stuck until you basically kind of like help push her both out of your way, but also help her.
Yeah, because, you know, the main game is to a certain degree a story of Gerda getting better and better at actualizing herself, right? As like at you know, enacting things in the world. Because initially she and Anders, it seems like, begin the game in this sort of state of neutrality, of hoping to wait out the war, hoping to let things blow over. And this is the Gerda that we're seeing at this point in the DLC, right? This is the Gerda that is still not mired in conflict, is still hoping that she can get out clean, before she's kind of forced into a situation where, like, she's gonna have to make decisions, and she's gonna have to grow as a character as well. So yeah. Yes. As we got quiet, they're like, "Oh, they're done." We just ran out of things to say. It's been like an hour, you know.
Exactly.
We both like to talk, but, you know, not this much.
Also, yeah, that's all we have to say about the game.
No, there's nothing left. That's all of it.
4 years of work. That's it.
We added some crates to this scene. That's definitely a thing to say.
We changed the lighting. I don't think
we did. Yeah.
Did you see in the main game? Did you see the market at night?
Don't think you see it at night at all. No, you see it only during the day. Yeah.
Not even with the smuggler. No, that's not at night either.
No.
Well, talking about, you know, returning characters.
It's my favorite cameo.
Yes.
Not disgruntled worker, somebody else is coming up.
And
here he comes.
little protest.
Alright.
And
Longer drum roll than I...
there we go.
Hey, Reinhardt. You know, one of the characters that I found very fun to write in the main game that unfortunately we didn't get a chance to explore quite as much in the DLC because by virtue of being a German soldier and Liva being in the Resistance, they're not going to cross paths quite as often as Gerda might have. Yeah, he was a fun one to write because I think he starts off very abrasive and unlikable, and then if you choose to play a version of the main game where you spend a lot of time with Reinhardt, I think you'll find a complicated character under all that.
I think he's great. Not as a person. He's obviously not a good person.
Morally very questionable. Man.
Yeah, but just like a fascinating person to think about because really you know, humanizing things that we are used to just reject. Not just say they're morally abhorrent, but also like kind of like not has nothing to do with us, you know.
Yeah.
And by treating him, you know, compassionately, not in the sense of forgiving him, but in the sense of just thinking about him as a person with not just a history, but also wishes that are in a way normal. Right?
Yeah, I mean, he's got his own pathology too that leads to some of the decisions he makes.
Yeah.
I think he was for me one of the characters that I really, you know, because of that complexity, because of that sort of imperfection, because of that seediness to a certain degree, and trying to understand how a person becomes seedy in that way. Why? What are the things that lead them into that type of behavior? I think was it was a fun avenue to explore. Maybe fun's not the right word, but like interesting and creatively gratifying is the way to put it. This is why I'm not a streamer. I feel like I'm just gonna go off on tangents and like say
wait, isn't that what a streamer do? Maybe you are a streamer.
Maybe
you are a streamer.
I don't think I have like the conviction of a streamer to stand by a thing where I slightly misspoke and be like, no, that is absolutely what I meant forever. And I feel like there are streamers who like make a career off of that.
But like drama.
Yeah,
drama.
Yeah. I'm gonna be like, oh, sorry, that's not.
I think you have it in you.
I don't think so.
I think
I'm there's only like 4 things during this that I'm like, I could apologize for the way I phrased that.
It's true. You can't have drama if you keep saying so.
Yeah, no,
right.
And so one of the things that we're sort of intersecting with here that we kind of alluded to in the Gregerson moment earlier in this video is
I love that you called him informed spectator because he answers the questions of the curious onlooker. This is what I want you to always. That's what I always want to see.
That is the peak.
Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just we're entering into sort of a labor dispute that's happening in Tinglev, right?
Yeah.
This is a situation where the guns that you were hoping to get have been were secretly sort of tucked away in a German supply truck, which a bunch of protesters have taken. And you know, we wanted to touch a little bit on some of the kind of the labor issues that were going on in Denmark at sort of this stage in the war. There were a lot of strikes, a lot of sort of protests. You know, some of them turned violent. Some of them, you know, Denmark compared to other places in the war, maybe, you know, what didn't experience maybe as firm fist, but still not an easy thing to protest a Nazi occupation if you're a factory worker, right? And we wanted to sort of explore that. You know, we touch on it in the main game. Gerda visits Vestergaard's factory a few times. There's some labor discontent there, but yeah, this was just a place where it kind of comes to a boil a little bit more. And here we're maybe seeing the ramifications of some of our earlier actions indicated in the UI, but also in, you know, what the sort of parameters of the situation that you're walking into. It's going to be a little bit different depending on what you did in earlier scenes.
Specifically talking about Gregerson and the fact that in this playthrough we didn't free him. thus, didn't free somebody who's very important for the workers. And
Yes,
yeah.
Because he was a labor organizer, and now we're entering into a labor conflict where they're a man shy, and that guy happens to be somebody who is
I don't know if we'll get to it in this playthrough, but one of the very interesting tensions and the more nuanced ones is that Liva is this basically, I don't want to call her a champagne socialist, but she inherited her communism in class, in uni, from friends, while Bente is, she comes from the working class. She was born to working people, and she has a much more intimate and natural connection to these issues, and the way that they approach a situation where a labor dispute might lead to violence is very, very different, and doesn't map so comfortably into kind of like our normal, I guess, flat political discussions, right? There's all kinds of ways to care for people in that situation. Yeah, she thinks, like Bente, who maybe feels more closer to these people, thinks the most important thing is to not hurt them. Right?
Yeah. She has a sort of protective instinct because this is where she comes from, right? Whereas Liva, being able to sort of live in the land of pure ideology as a student, can be like, well, but the right thing to do is like constantly, and again, it's up to the player how they'll actually articulate this, but like, one version of Liva is very like, I am ideologically, crystalline, and I think like we need to, the workers need to rise up and strike at any opportunity, right? And Benta might be a little bit more of a realist about that situation. She might be like, if you care about the workers in a very practical way, you don't want them getting hurt. And of course Peter. Yeah. Any opportunity to light a fire.
And this kind of tension, we try to map it on different things, like the way that you approach fighting the Nazis is like, do you hurt Nazis right now as much as you can, seize any opportunity to hurt your enemy, or are you more of a strategist, but basically might even postpone or hold yourself from engaging the enemy for bigger gains down the line. And we try to articulate exactly the situation where none of these things is immediately and obviously seen as the solution.
Right. There's always a bit of, hopefully, the intention was informed ambiguity to every choice you make, right? You can infer how things might go based on some information you have, based on what you know about the characters, but you're never going to be 100% sure that things will work out a certain way. And I think that's actually a really important thing, to make sure that players don't necessarily get bogged down in sort of analysis paralysis, because there's going to be this thing where exactly, like, choice A leads to outcome A, choice B leads to outcome B. And then you can sort of just agonize over this because you know exactly how it's going to go. And I think giving a little bit of that wiggle room to players where they can they have a pretty good idea of where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. But you don't there's agonizing over it won't help you, because it might not play out exactly in the way you might imagine. And I think, to me, that's a really important part of making good decision points in games, where like you can you're not coming in from a space of ignorance, but you're also not you don't have absolute knowledge, because I think that's also a more real reflection on these kind of dilemmas, right? Yeah,
the way we structure the decisions that the player needs to make in these scenes. Is that in many of them, it's not just about making one decision, right? It's not just about saying this and not that, and then there's always, I don't know if you noticed when Liva had that dilemma right now, there's like 3 layers of how to approach things, and it's because we wanted to kind of like communicate these dilemmas are complicated. So Liva usually would have not just a question of what to do, but also with which attitude to go with, right? And this decision tree leads to very complicated and different outcomes, right?
And there's also the how, right? There's initially you kind of choose the what, then you choose the how, and then you choose sort of the attitudinal how of it as well.
Exactly. So, and we saw like, I think we saw at least 3 levels of decision making now before we get the result, which is very easy for a writer.
Such a breeze. I mean, branching is a lot of fun to write, but it's also it's a lot more to write. So, but I think it's worth it. Hopefully it makes a more rich play experience.
And as always, you can see some reflection on what happened from your teammates and very tangible results of what you did.
Yeah, one of the things we kind of generally try to do is when you receive an outcome in the game, you generally get some sort of feedback, whether it's UI or character dialogue, that makes it clear why that outcome occurred. So retroactively, you can kind of look at what decisions led to what outcomes in a lot of situations. But when you get to those decision points, we try to make that more ambiguous. So that by the time you've reached the end of your play experience, you can kind of have a sense of the sort of map of choices that led to certain outcomes. But as you're playing, hopefully you're much more in the moment and kind of, just choosing based on what you know when, or in that moment.
And I think that concludes our gameplay.
Yeah.
Let's just grab this. We don't need the recording anymore. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. If you have not played the base game Gerda and Flavin Winter at all, you can get it as a bundle with the DLC. It's called the Mod Stand Edition, and it includes both the base game and the new story, Liva story. If you have, you can just get a Liva story. Please play it. We love to hear players' experiences, so please write to us either on Steam forums or on even on our Twitter. We love to hear from you. And thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the full story of Liva.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye.